Well, I want to put in a shameless plug for PBS, actually, because last night Roberta came over, we had dinner, and we usually go watch something. And I had just looked and found a documentary on the PBS Nova, which had to do with, I think the title is, "The Brain, Are We in Charge? Who's in charge?" Okay, we have a brain that's in charge. And so basically that's what we're going to be talking about today. And let's see what happens. I took notes on that PBS thing. So, and I think I sent it out to everybody. I sent that to Cass. Did you get that one?
Yeah, she did.
Yes,
She did.
I did, and it's very good.
I think so too. Very good. Thank you. Alrighty. Many years ago, we had something called the Coffee Crew, and also we had something called the Not Yet Dead Poets. And the Not Yet Dead Poets periodically would get comments like, everybody's reality is just equally valid. And I said, I'm not so sure is everybody's reality is, or what they believe is equally valid. It has equal validity for the person, that's for sure. But anyway, so that's kind of where we're starting from, and we'll just read on. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about internal reality, what the brain comes up with, and external reality, which is all this stuff around here, and how do they relate one to the other. So I'm going to be reading this. I've read it 2 or 3 times, and I'm going to change it every time I look at it. So I just said, what you see is what you get. So that's going to be it. So my purpose today is to really expose us to 2 concepts of reality. The first is internal reality. Each of us has an internal reality that differs from individual to individual. And the second is external reality, which is supposedly objective and doesn't change from person to person. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about internal reality first. An individual's internal reality corresponds to a collection of processes and representations that we carry up here, and the effects that are essentially, but not only, subconscious. Sigmund Freud had a term for that, and we'll just kind of let that one slide, because I'm not going to talk about Sigmund Freud, because that's, I think, a little passé by now. But nevertheless, I think he had some ideas about those things that drive us internally. These internal models of how the world works is dynamic, flexible, and subject to change as it's shaped by our senses. The information that our senses take in is transmitted to the brain for interpretation by neural networks, and which helps us interpret and validate our understanding of the objective or external world. To illustrate, and this is actually Roberta's contribution, I really do like it. To illustrate the difference between these sorts of things, this is Roberta talking. I love going to the beach. There's the smell of the ocean, the sound of the waves, the sun, and an occasional dip in the water, and I find it very relaxing. My experience at Clearwater Beach, Florida, was a little different. It was great in some ways, but I found out that I was being stung by jellyfish. I almost drowned. I got a horrific sunburn. It was the absolute worst I've ever had in my life. So you would like to perceive beach as something to be a dangerous place. 2 subjective, 2 widely divergent perceptions of basically the same place, okay? Because that's where Roberta would go. So now let's talk a little bit about external reality, or objective reality is another word for it. Whatever exists in the external world is external reality. You see the sun, the moon, the stars, the air, the sky, ocean, all sorts of things. And you see also those things in the cosmic universe, along with those manifestations, which are definitely devised by us, people, okay? And those things appear steadfast and stable in Einstein's words. If they do, if they're steadfast and stable, maybe we can do physics on those, okay? So my background's physics, if you don't know. So external reality is what I would deal with for many years in grad school and all that sort of stuff. And it does seem, I tend to agree with Einstein in that respect. Yeah, we can do physics on these things, and it does seem to be held from one time to another, and it's unchanging, immutable, so forth. So that's the way I look at it. So that's our external reality. So what's the problem? Problems arise when these two forms of reality get confused with one another. Very much like the question, if a tree fell in the woods and nobody was there to hear it, was there still sound? Well, this turns out to be a semantics problem, not anything else. It's just that, okay? People experience sound in their ears, yes, and they perceive it, but also sound, in a physics sense, is the waves propagating from me to you. Hopefully I'm talking loud enough. I've been told I don't sometimes, and sometimes it says shut up, and maybe that's probably what I need to do. But anyway, each of us have experiential concepts of what our senses think is the real world out there. They are as unique as we are. Why? Because it's based on what we have experienced, even what is brought to the table as a result of our genetic makeup. There's called epigenetics. I don't know if you've all heard about that. I think I've got the right terminology. Epigenetics is basically if you have a serious traumatic incident, it'll alter your genetic makeup, and that can be passed on from generation to generation, which is, we thought that wasn't going to be the case. But the twin paradox, if you wish, if there's a twin paradox, the Kellys, the twins Kelly, one was in space, one was not. Their genetic makeup was changed by those two different experiences. Both of them work, I think, for NASA. And I met him once in Nashville, actually. Interesting guy. Okay, so where are we? Each of us has experiential concepts of which senses think is the real world out there. They are as unique as we are, as I said before. It comes down to nature versus nurture sometimes, and that's what we routinely call it. And we are born with a pre-programmed boot drive oftentimes, if you wish. The internal sense of reality allows us to deal with the sensory data that is flooding into us at all times from all our five senses and then some, I think, and form our parallel, portable idea of the world and how it operates our internal reality. As a physicist, I'm a firm believer that there is an objective reality out there, and it's orderly, and we can make predictions. So let's enters the skeptic at this point. And we're going to talk a little bit about Descartes. It's very impressively easy to generate skepticism in this area about the world around us and inject doubt into almost every aspect of what we perceive and thus believe to be the external world. However, it's utmost importance that we resolve what Descartes saw, the disease of skepticism, which, if uncontrolled or unanswered, threatens to upheave the very foundations of knowledge. The disease of skepticism for Descartes was the corkscrew of doubt that incessantly questioning a reality, what it would lead us into. Descartes' theory of dualism was essentially that it's mind and matter, basically. Descartes believes that you can have wait a minute, it's right here. Descartes composed entity of mind and matter, man. Descartes gave priority to the mind and argued that the mind could exist without the body, and the body could not exist without the mind. It also, threatens to do so, we can upset the apple cart, if you wish, in terms of our basic understanding of knowledge. It threatens to do so our perceptions based on beliefs which are indeed subject to perfectly valid skeptical worries. However, the conclusions that are drawn for some of these worries do not satisfy me to proclaim that we cannot know things external to us. Philosophers have long wrestled with the question of whether or how it is possible to really know external reality. We are sentient creatures, and utterly dependent upon our subjective perceptions. We are trapped within our minds, within our brains. The mind is a neural network. The name neural network comes from the fact that it's the way we believe we are wired up here, okay? And I've got a picture, and if anyone wants to look into this at all, but it's basically, this is, you can see, probably can't see it very well. Basically, we've got input on one side, we've got a bunch of nodes, and then interconnections between them, and then there's an output side. And that's basically at the very simplest of a neural network. The brain is much more complicated than that. It's divided into about 100 different things, the language centers and the optics part of us and all that, the hearing and so forth. It's a very complex structure, for sure. But it can be used, a neural network can be used to determine, say, is what we're looking at a cat or a dog, okay? Neural networks are a means of doing machine learning, which is a computer, in computer terms, learns to perform some task by analyzing and training examples using data based on a wide variety of initial conditions. It then comes down to how do we tweak our model and bring it to bear upon the filtering of a vast amount of sensory data we take in continuously. There are some people that everything seems to go into the brain, and that is not good either, although they have a tremendous capacity usually to memorize what's going on in the world. And sometimes it's considered to be a photographic memory, if you want to think of it that way. Most of today's electronic neural nets are organized into layers and nodes, and they are feed forward, meaning that data moves through the network in one direction. A computer-based neural network can distinguish between a cat and a dog based on a few simple questions. For example, does it have floppy ears, or does it have pointy ears? Does it bark or meow? And that's about the simplest one you could think of, and that would be easily done. I think the last time I talked on something even close to this, I brought in the little 20-question ball, okay, and you ask questions, it asks you questions, you answer, and you plug those in, and I think Dave Hebert, who is the pianist at Presbyterian Church, I showed that to him at Rotary one morning and said, think of something, Dave, and he did. And I says, okay, let me ask you these questions, and I punched it into the ball, and so at the very end he says, I think you're thinking of a goat. And you should have seen the look on his face. It was absolutely amazing, because it's what he was thinking of. He was thinking of a goat, and there was all these questions, they're bigger than a bread box, it's, way more than a pound, things like that. So there you go. Okay, here we go. Let's see where we are. People underestimate the capacity of our brains to create their own convincing ideas about the world. As humans, we have trained our brains to interpret what sensory data produces to form a subjective, internal model of our private universe. The model we carry around with us between our ears, we perceive it as a form of reality. This model is used to make quick decisions, and we can make quick decisions sometimes, much faster than we probably should, on the order of milliseconds, which is not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a long time, but for humans, that's pretty long time, pretty short period of time. The God of my understanding, the creator of this universe, is the universe itself. This is what I believe is real. My faith statement about external reality, as Einstein said, if it's stable and I can do physics on it, that's as good as it gets, and that's good enough for me. And that was basically, to paraphrase him again. The tools we use to predict the next instant in time from a physics standpoint are mathematical in nature, which is just a codification of reasons and reasoning. The initial conditions for the next instant in time for the state of the universe is, you guessed it, this instant in time, okay? And it goes on like that. Now we must be careful, for there is so much we can do to act like God as we try and predict outcomes of this massively complex universe. And this is where classical Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics have issues. If the scenario we're trying to examine is very large, we can usually predict with reasonable accuracy the outcome. But if it involves the very small, the best we can do is talk about the probability of finding a particle of matter in a particular energy state, a particular location, particular momentum, etc. And this is just mainly because what we use to measure things has energy, has momentum, and it changes the state that they're looking at. So it's on the order of the same thing that you're looking at, and so that makes a difference. And that's basically the difference between Newtonian or classical physics and quantum physics. It comes down to basically that. The initial, okay, there we go. So I did ask my son Mark how he would explain how one would train a neural network. And he sent me a number of computer simulations that show what might do this. And they involve racing strategies. So if you were, and I could bring this, or I could send it to you, or I may just send it to you. There's a number of these out there. One of them starts with a bunch of robots, if you wish, at the starting line. One of them looks very much like a human. One of them looks a little bit more like a dog. One of them sits on 3 tripod, and the other one is a unipod. And they start different initial conditions and watch how they advance. And it's a 100-meter long race. And you watch people fall down, or robots fall down and get back up. They have to learn how to get back up, and so forth. It goes on that way. And then they go back, and after every round, it gets a little feedback. That was good. Okay, so we will reward those paths through the neural network by adding extra weight to those, or decrementing parts that didn't do very good in that neural network. So it didn't lead, obviously, to the right outcome. All right. To train a neural network, one has to devise a means by which the weights connecting the nodes and succeeding layers are rewarded, strengthened, and when the correct output is recognized. That's what I just said, or tried to say. One can also use decrement the weights along that path, and there seems to be, once a path fires, okay, through from neuron to neuron to neuron through the dendrites connecting them, there's something left over which interacts with the dopamine, which will it will encourage the strengthening of that particular path, which is really pretty cool. It's really unusual. Life works that way. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the aha experience, which I talked about, I think, the last time. I know you can't see this, but I don't know. I'll just show you. And this, basically, we have a body of a neuron here. Dendrites go out. These connect to other neurons and so forth. And that makes a path, one after the other. And so if this fires, it's going to send a signal to the next one. And if it's got a strong signal, then that path can be, with the presence of dopamine, can be actually made even stronger. The aha experience, which Fred Helsley and I had fun with when we were 50 years ago now. I'd walk into his office and he would say, "Be quiet, don't move, and, stay still." And I said, "Well, what are you doing, Fred?" And he says, "I'm having a moment," and that's what he called it, a moment. It's an aha experience. It's a moment in which everything feeds back onto itself. Basically, his sensory input comes in, we modify our internal model of what's going on, and then in the next instant, more sensory data comes in, and it's compared to that which is in the brain, and it just keeps saying, I've been here before, aha. That's a deja vu thing. It works like that. So it's really an interesting sort of thing. Psychiatrists routinely hear about all sorts of unusual perceptual experiences, not just from people who are psychotic. A wide variety of abnormal conditions, as well as a great many normal but misinterpreted phenomenon can cause distorted perceptions. And yet, we find our own subjective perception so pervasive. This is the subjective stuff, the stuff that's up here, so pervasive that we're more than willing to doubt the laws of physics than to doubt our own minds. We can't help assuming that the perceptions equals reality. And in a sense, that my poetic friends said, yes, everybody has their sense of reality, and to that extent, yes, they do have meaning, and they're good for that person, but they're pretty much good for that only for that person, if you wish. They're custom made by our brains for us, for the things that we do, the experiences we experience. People underestimate the capacity of our brains to create their own convincing realities. They underestimate how powerfully realistic some associative experiences, hallucinations, and other recognized mental and neural misconceptions can seem. In watching, well, I won't give it away, but if you go back and watch the PBS thing, there's an interesting leap of faith made by the person who's kind of the host for this thing, and you'll see, and I'm not going to give it away, but it's quite amazing, and I've seen people that deal with this sort of thing. There's a fellow in London, I think, or in England, who does this sort of thing, and he tricks the mind, tricks you, and thinks like he goes as a mind reader, is what he does, but we can actually figure out from what's going on around us and that sort of thing, what the brain is going to change and think. Okay, so what's the role of dopamine in all this? Dopamine's been around as long as we have, and longer, but it is often considered just a reward for getting something right, okay? Well, it's more than that, it turns out, and there's a gal from, let's see, where is she from? She works at the Brain and Behavioral Research Facility up in Nashville, at Vanderbilt. And her name is Erin Perry, I believe it is. She got her PhD in somewhere between 1918 and 2018 and 2016. And it was on this sort of thing. What happens is when that matches up, the brain releases a little bit of dopamine, okay? And that goes into reward. It gives you a wonderful experience, and it turns out that's what we ought to be doing, is actually trying to encourage the secretion of dopamine. It's the pleasure molecule, the reward molecule, and they have found there are multiple forms that dopamine can take. Some enhance the connections, and others help disconnect. So if you get something wrong, there's still hope. The dopamine, that form of dopamine will actually tend to get rid of the connections. Okay, so here's what happens. I'm about ready to wrap up here in a little bit. The neurotransmitter dopamine has been linked with learning and memory for a long time, as I said. In particular, encoding and consolidation of memories require the stimulation of dopamine receptors as part of hippocampal, striatal, prefrontal lobe. It's up here. That's where you do a lot of that sort of thing. That orchestrates the formation of new memories, which triggers dopamine release. Anything that gives you pleasure will trigger the release of dopamine. This can range from having fun, things that you enjoy in an activity, like dancing, cooking, sex, shopping, and even certain drugs. Dopamine activates the reward pathway to the brain, leading you to desire these activities even more. Research from Cedars-Sinai sheds light on how the human brain rapidly forms new memories, provide insights and potential new treatments for memory disorders. A new study examined neurons that produce dopamine, a compound that acts as the neurotransmitter, and it found that these dopamine neurons play a critical role in the formation in episodic memory, which allows people to remember where they left their keys, where I left this talk on my thing. I had to go back this morning. It's not doing real well, apparently, for me, but that's the mechanism. So, we'll leave it at that, but here are some of the benefits of dopamine. Okay. Dopamine is generated and serves as part of the reward system for us, both positive and negative, which I've said. So here's some of the outcomes. There's 14 of these that are positive outcomes, and if you can increase your dopamine levels, this is great. Okay, 1, it increases enthusiasm. It increases higher motivation, stronger drive to be productive, reduced drug addiction and dependence. It improves cognition function, lends to faster learning, better long-term memory and working memory, increased focus and concentration, which I obviously need some of, increased creativity, improved mood, reduced fear, increased social bonding, stronger relationships, and an increased tolerance to pain. So what can we do to increase dopamine production? And this is a 10-step thing, and it gives you some ideas along what you can do. Eat plenty of protein. Reduce your intake of saturated fats. Get plenty of sunshine and vitamin D, of which most of us are probably lacking, especially come springtime. Drink good coffee, and that's one that's been up and down over the years, obviously, but I think it comes to the fact coffee is good for you. Meditate, right? Stand up, exercise, and not just exercise your prerogative, just exercise, the good old-fashioned kind. Use probiotics, get plenty of sleep, and drink green or black tea. And that's the end of that. But I would say please go, and if you can, download the streaming version off of PBS. And I think I sent that out, and I did. That's what Cass has already been into it. I sent it out last night, and she's into it already, so, which is great. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.